Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of 401 Access Denied. My name is Joe Carson, one of your co-hosts today, Chief Security Scientist at Thycotic. And I'm really excited about today's discussion. This is a follow-up to the previous guest, Jessica, where we have another guest, Jessica, today, who's going to take us through some of the human behavior sides of cyber attacks and really the true impact. This is the true cost of cybercrime. So really excited about today's episode. And again, I'm joined here with Mike, my awesome co-host. Mike, do you want to give us a little brief introduction?
Yep, Mike Gruen, CISO and VP of Engineering here at Cybrary, located in DC. And Jessica, thank you for joining us. Very much looking forward to this. And to start off with, why don't you give a little bit of background on yourself? Maybe mention the fact that you have a book coming out and a little bit about that as well.
Sure. Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here. So thanks for the warm welcome. So I'm Dr. Jessica Barker. I'm co-CEO of a cybersecurity company based in the UK. We work globally, called Cygenta. So with my husband, FC, we run a small and awesome team working on the human, technical, and physical sides of cybersecurity. And I've always worked on the human side, my husband on the technical side and the physical side. And so a few years ago, we thought, you know what, let's bring it all together and see what we can do. I work on awareness, behavior, culture. Absolutely love what I get to do with all sorts of different clients on that side of things. I also published a book in September this year, published by Kogan Page, called Confident Cybersecurity. Became an Amazon #1 bestseller on the day of release. Just saying. So people want to learn more about cybersecurity, which I think is great news, and have another book coming up in January, which I have co-authored with Kieran McMahon, Bruce Hallis, and Adrian Davies. And that is Cybersecurity ABCs, all about awareness, behavior, and culture.
That's fantastic. And I think this is sometimes the forgotten part of cybersecurity. Is one thing that I kind of usually get upset about over the years is we always blame the humans. We always blamed them, they were the fault. They were the error. They were the ones that clicked on the link. And when we think about it, I always get upset at that because I will see that they're the victims as well. In most cases, even when we talk about insiders, they are secondary victims. They're not intentionally, if they drop something, leave something in an airport or they click on something, in many cases, that's their job. And we victimize them too much. And that always got me upset. And I think it was really important that, what you're doing in the industry to really raise the awareness and raise that these are victims. These are the victims of crimes. And we should empower them. We should look to how we can use technology to help them, not make them the blame. So is that something you're seeing as a kind of upcoming kind of awareness factor?
Yeah, I think it's changing actually a lot, which is brilliant. When I first entered the industry, it's basically 10 years ago, I came in with a background from sociology, politics, civic design, and I found it really weird the way that everyone blamed the user as well. We didn't even call them people. We blamed the user as if they're this like different beast that's different to us, as if we aren't users as well. And yeah, a lot of kind of victim blaming. So I was really interested to draw parallels, for example, between some of the sociology research around victim blaming and some of the stuff in criminology, and then what was happening in cybersecurity. And you do still see it, of course. You do, unfortunately, still see a lot of victim blaming, both at the people level and at the company level. But I think we're moving away from it. I think the last couple of years, we have started to see that shift where many people are calling out this victim blaming. So for example, one thing I do, I'm the chair of Club CISO, which is a group of over 500 information security leaders. And in our research this year, we asked them, about 100 of our membership, what they were most interested in for the year ahead. And they said security culture. And we asked what they were doing in terms of advancing security culture. And one of the #1 things they said was promoting a proactive, no blame report culture. So really trying to move to a just culture where we don't blame people for incidents. So there's a definite shift happening. And I think that's really positive.
Yep. Yeah, I think right, in a lot of cases, it's people just either just trying to do their job the best way they can and making an honest mistake or not, or whatever it is. Or as Joe pointed out, the sort of clicking on links. I think there's probably, and I'm curious what you found, like the number of actual malicious insiders is probably very, very small.
Yes. It is. And a malicious insider is really damaging. When they strike, the psychology of a malicious insider is fascinating. We can look at sort of models around fraud that show us. So there's the Crow's Pentagon, which looks at the sort of 5 different factors that are usually in place when somebody carries out sort of internal fraud. When we have a malicious insider, usually they are disgruntled. We'll have all seen these cases.
Right.
Often somebody who has been in an organization for years or decades, and they just feel looked over. They haven't been promoted. They feel they're not getting rewarded or recognized. So they're disgruntled. They usually have a pressure, maybe debt, maybe problems at home, whatever it is, something driving them there. And then a few other factors, overconfidence, thinking they can get away with it. They usually are pretty smart. And all of these things kind of come together, and they actually convince themselves that they are not a criminal. They're not doing anything wrong. They convince themselves the organization is wrong, and that they are getting what they deserve by doing whatever they're doing. But that is rare. To see that. It's, I think the figures vary according to research, somewhere between like 3 and 10% of the insider activity, whereas the vast majority is non-malicious insiders, exactly as you've both described.
Right. But I think the malicious one, it's just a much better story. So it tends to get more, right? Like that's where it's going to be.
Media attraction. It's
exactly.
News. An employee accidentally clicks on a link, company gets attacked. Doesn't really make the headline news. But malicious insider who purposely, came back in with the credentials and deleted the entire service, that's what makes news. So unfortunately, I always get upset as well as, we tend to go after those big stories and we don't get into the reality of what really it is, and getting into the human side is that ultimately, the internet and the browser was created to click on things. And that's ultimately, what many people's jobs is to open attachments, to look at links and to fill in forms and to, in many cases, the internet. And what we do today is mostly in a browser. And to victimize people for not being able to detect, they're relying on technology in the background to do the job, to do what's intended to do. And, if you clicked up 100 links or 1,000 links and, the 1,001 is a malicious, I don't think we should be blaming the humans. I think it goes back to one of the things I always believe is that we need to empower them to be able to not be afraid. I remember a few years ago, I did a major workshop and educational session with all teachers and police force. And they said, if there's one thing I can tell organizations that would make the difference, is what would it be? And the one thing that came to mind is that, never be afraid to ask for advice. Is that when you accidentally click on something, don't be afraid to go and say, I did something and I'm not sure whether it's malicious or whether it was good or not. The organizations who put that in practice really are able to, they're able to stop the attacks much earlier because the employees are more willing to actually speak out to IT. Is that something, Jesse, do you feel that we're getting there more, accelerating that type of mentality and culture shift?
I think we are. It's slow to change. But I mean, just yesterday, I was speaking to a client, financial services, and they were talking about their phishing simulations and the fact that they're moving away from looking at click rate to looking at report rate. And I've had that conversation with so many CISOs in the last year, compared to a few years ago where it was very rare that somebody was looking at that. So I think we are moving towards it. Of course, it takes time, but that positive reinforcement of the behaviors you want is so much more impactful than just blaming people for the behaviors that you don't want, that, like you say, Joe, are impossible anyway. Don't click on links. Well, I have to click on links. Or be wary. Be wary of suspicious emails. Well, some of them are obvious and some of them are much more sophisticated. So what are we even telling people when we say be wary of suspicious emails? That's incredibly vague and unhelpful.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of, I saw a security researcher. She had, I think I've told the story before. I want to say it was a Black Hat, and she was talking. Yeah, exactly. Everybody will hear it again. I only have so many stories. But she was talking about how, so she's a security researcher. She was like, we tell people they have to be vigilant, like 007 vigilant all the time. And she's like, how hard is that? And so she decided that she was going to hire a company to spearfish her. She knew it was coming. She knew how many times they were going to try and attack her. And she knew over what time period they were going to do it. And I think she said she fell for 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 5 or whatever it was. And it's impossible. And even as she clicked the link, as soon as she clicked the link, she was like, oh, nuts. That was definitely a phishing attack. That was them. And I screwed up. And it's because they just, right. Depending on what your job function is, I have an externally facing email. Like there's people who have to contact me who I've never been in touch with before. And then it's, don't open emails, don't click links. And so I don't think awareness and being vigilant is a reasonable ask. And I'm curious what your thoughts are, Jessica.
Yeah. I think awareness is really important. I think people, being aware that this stuff happens, understanding some of the telltale signs, I think that's all good. But we can't rely on that as our only defense. And we also have to make sure that with our messaging, that we are precise, that we're consistent, and that we only recommend stuff or try and advise things that actually people can action. Otherwise, we just reduce their ability to engage with us. We reduce the extent to which they want to, we increase fatigue. We're just creating noise and making it much harder to get through with the messaging that actually matters. So I did a keynote for SANS Security Awareness Summit a couple of weeks ago, and I paralleled some of the communications we've seen around COVID-19 and cybersecurity communications, and some of the criticism of some of the COVID-19 communications where it has been imprecise, where it's been vague, where it's been actually recommending stuff that people can't practically do, and where it says things, for example, in the UK, be alert. Well, what does that mean? How am I alert all the time? That's exhausting beyond anything else. And focus groups around those messaging found that people's understanding of it was low. And actually, in some age groups, their flouting of the rules doubled. And it's the same, I think, with cybersecurity messaging. So me and my husband, FC, did a sort of parody video of some of the cybersecurity messaging where it's kind of like, do this, but don't do this. And what about that? And what about this? And we end up being so contradictory that it just ends up impossible for even us to action, let alone people who aren't security professionals.
Oh, yeah, no. The fact is, I break the rules all the time. I get I have to, in order to do what I need to do, I have to click on links sometimes that I don't know who this person is, but I'm reasonably confident, and I have to use my brain to figure out what's the risk here. And I think awareness, I think you bring a great point. I just want to make sure to stress it is awareness of what to do is way more important than awareness of being vigilant. Like the idea of vigilance is tough. The idea of that, oh shit moment, I clicked the link. Now what do I do is way more important. And something, and to Joe's point, like we need to make sure that CISOs and people like me aren't like, oh, what did you do? It's like, oh, okay, let me help you. Let's try and figure this out. Let's get ahead of it. Thank you so much for letting me know early rather than like sweeping it under the rug and me having to find out about it. It's sort of like my kids, they're not going to get in trouble if they come to me, but if I find out about it after the fact, that's where there's the problem.
And there's even the diagram, that cartoon that we've seen many times. Everyone has a Dave in the organization. We got IT and security on one side, and you got Dave on the other side. But the be honest reality is we are all Dave. All of us are. It just comes down to how criminals abuse our trust and what's our point of being abused, and even the point where having to look and be vigilant. Your point, Jessica, is really looking at being alert all the time. That's not going to be able, that would be just so much pressure and fatigue and exhausting to do that all the time. And I remember years ago getting into implementing, it was a security communication to the employees. It was a large organization, over 100,000 employees, and we were doing this communication, and we kept failing. We kept failing all the time because putting it into this very legal, very official policy speak does not relate and does not communicate effectively to the employees. Right. And what I found is that, really getting into, we changed it eventually. We actually brought kids in to tell us how to communicate to adults. And they
Nice.
told us that the best thing is getting into comic books. Comic books tell a story. Getting into that image and graphical. And we took specific use cases and we actually put it into storyboards. And that was the most kind of crucial thing. That we took one example of, USB, plugging it in, what can the impact can that be? And it also made that we didn't have to translate it, because then you get into language barriers, was able to be translated across that. So what's your suggestion into some of the best ways that we can communicate with employees effectively?
Yeah, I think that's a great example. And we've used some comic book stuff as well with clients that works really nicely. People engage in it. You can have some fun with the graphics. So I'm a big believer in telling a story, which again, that speaks to telling stories are really powerful, and people engage with those way more than they do, say, statistics or facts and stuff like that. So using emotion in the right way. Empowering, definitely. You used that word earlier, Joe, and I totally agree. So moving towards empowering rather than focusing on the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. One thing I always sort of talk to clients about is the difficulty of any awareness raising if you don't have an action attached to it, and if people can't do it. So for example, if a client's wanting to do a campaign around passwords, but they don't have a password manager, or then they don't have single sign-on, that's really challenging, because then what are you asking people to do? You're asking people to remember complicated, unique passwords. That's just physically impossible. That's not happening. So I think making sure you have an associated behavior and that behavior can be supported is really important for awareness raising. And also bringing this stuff to life. So I find demonstrations of attacks are really powerful. Getting anything interactive and hands-on, whether that is lock picking or stuff like that, but getting people engaged, incident response scenarios, tabletops and things like that, all really effective. Anything that brings this stuff to life and is engaging.
Yeah, I love the lock picking, because it shows the different. It shows that in a physical. I always like to try and compare things in the physical world to that reality and digital world, because sometimes in digital it's hard to show the impact. And when you get into lock picking, it really helps you show that visualization. It helps you bring it to life. We can't change people. We have to take security and put it into the existing. I always use, there's a metaphor that I've used, to try and compare this, is that, if I turn around and tell all my employees that from tomorrow, I know that you drive to work, I know you drive from A to B, and that it's most convenient. But tomorrow, I want you to take a train, a bus, walk, and cycle. And that's because it's safer, it's more secure. But to change that habit, it's difficult to do. What you want to do, what your real intention was to do, is actually maybe go slow, or be careful as you're driving on the road. So what you're trying to do is not change people's habits, but you're trying to embed security into their existing methods of doing things. And it should also, somewhat be in the background. It should not be something that they should, potentially have to completely change. It should be just actually existing security controls into what they do. Mike,
my feeling is right. It's really about changing people's thought process, or how they approach how they're going to do what they're going to do. Like when I got to Cybrary, for example, in 2017, the company had been around since 2015. And so I came in and I was like, okay, I have to change how we're doing things, but I also want to make it so that I don't want to change how we're doing it, just how. What I want to do is change people's thought process of why they're doing what they're doing, and then just make it so that it's just more obvious and more clear. Oh, I should do it this way because X, Y, and Z. Not everybody needs admin access to this thing, because these are the bad things that can happen if everybody has access to the PayPal account, for example. So
it's hearts and minds, isn't it? And helping people understand the why, which I think you've both touched on there, is really important. Because if we just tell people, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and give them no idea as to why, then it's like, well, why should I? That's just making my life more difficult. Right. And it's pointless. It's just InfoSec coming up with some rules.
And my feeling is it's also about making it not just the why, but make it easier for them to do it the right way than to do it the hard way. And I've learned that lesson over and over again across whatever it is in technology, is people will it's a stream, right? People like the water will flow the path of least resistance. So make that path as easy and as secure as possible. And we're talking Right. And we're talking about humor earlier. I do like, so our security awareness training, that was one of the things that I looked for was I found a company that does them. It's a monthly module. They use a lot of humor. It's a little hit or miss sometimes, but overall, the feedback I've gotten from everyone is like, as bad as security awareness training is, this is the best security awareness training I've taken because has that element of humor. And I thought it was pretty cool when our HR people came and they're like, we want to do like anti-harassment training and we want it to be similar to how we're doing the security awareness training and that same level of humor, but not cringy. Which is much more difficult to do in anti-harassment than security.
Yeah, definitely. That's a challenge.
Exactly.
You want to get that right.
Absolutely.
We want a Mr. Bean version of cybersecurity. That's the how. But I have a question. So, Mike and Jessica, one of the things I've got is that being you based in the UK and Mike in the US and me based in Estonia. Is that, are we seeing, differences in cultures as well? Because I have seen in North America, some cases in the past year or two, they've taken a much more aggressive approach to employees, disciplinary actions. Is that something we're seeing continuing? That employees, maybe clicking a phishing email that now become, actually losing their job as part of that. Is that something? Is it a culture difference, or are we seeing that just being a unusual just spike in that events, and we're changing more to seeing them as victims?
I'm really interested to sort of hear Mike's perspective on this. I can certainly talk about one case from the UK, which hit the headlines, and I think I know the final outcome of the case. Essentially, a worker for a pretty small company up in Scotland, she received a phishing email. I think it was invoice fraud. She transferred the money, and then they realized it was phishing. Too late. The money's gone. We've heard that story a million times, unfortunately. But the company fired her. So she lost her job, and then they took her to court to try to sue her for the money that was lost, which I think was a couple of $100,000.
Wow.
And in the end, I think I've seen the final bit of the court case because, sometimes these things come back around again. But in the end, the last I saw it, the employer or previous employer had lost the case because it was deemed that the employee hadn't had sufficient training. And so then that sets a precedent of, organizations need to make sure they support people, that they train people, that they ensure there is a way to report these phishing emails, that everyone understands it. That was a sort of a tense moment, I think, of like, which way is it going to go? Because if the courts had sided with the previous employer, then that sets a whole different precedent where suddenly we are blaming people on a whole other level.
Yes.
Yeah, and Mike's,
I get scared of that actually. That
that seems terrible. Yeah. I mean, and my experience with working with different organizations. So prior to being at Cybrary, as a company called Red Owl, and we sold mostly to financial services. It was a user behavioral analytics platform, right? So trying to identify potential inside risk and inside threat and potentially malicious insiders, which I found funny given how small percentages. In any event, what I found was that I don't know if it's a culture, if it's a U.S. culture thing or if it's an industry thing, but definitely there was big disparity, big differences between how different organizations just approached it. There were some that wanted to rule like draconian dictator style with an iron fist. Anybody who screws up is out of here type of attitudes. And then there were others who were, what I would classify as way more progressive. No, it's on us. Like if a user does a thing and it results in bad stuff, that was us failing them, not them failing the company. And I don't know if it's a culture by country or industry, or if the stakes are higher at large financial institutions and therefore they feel that they have to be more draconian. I don't know where the boundaries are. I do know that I worked very briefly at one, and within the first couple of weeks, there was a phishing awareness. Like they sent me a spear phishing email, and I didn't handle it properly. But what's funny is I couldn't handle it properly. I was supposed to report it, but I was on a Mac and they didn't support Mac. So there was no way for me to actually report it. And I got reprimanded for not reporting the email because I wasn't using Outlook on Windows. And I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
That's a perfect example. Exactly. A perfect example of like, you have to make this stuff easier.
Right.
But yeah, I see the same. I see a big split between organizations that are much more progressive, as you've described, and organizations that are still in that, what I see as a kind of older mindset that we're leaving behind of blaming people. And I don't really see it being split by sector, because I know some big banks that are much more progressive, certainly from a UK perspective. So I haven't yet kind of worked out, other than on a sort of maturity level in terms of their security culture, I haven't really worked out what the pattern is.
It might just be who's in charge, the CISO, right? I mean, it might just be, it just flows from them. I'm sorry, Joe, you were going to say.
Yeah, so I've had experience in this in the past. I did a lot of work, it's probably a good 10 years ago in the maritime industry. And what I saw was that in that culture and that change is that when you've got an incident, and this what I did see mostly in shipping accidents, is that if you find a policy failure, the insurance doesn't pay because the company was it wrong. If you find a human failure, the insurance pays. So sometimes what I did find was that as you get into cyber attacks then becoming much more a frequent occurrence, is that the company wanted to find a human at fault because then they were able to get the insurance money to pay for the accident. Versus that if they had a policy failure, let's say the employee didn't follow or the policy was wrong, you get into things like PCI and you get into ISO or you get into these frameworks. Now I'm at risk of a financial exposure from a regulatory compliance failure. So in many cases, sometimes that the way the structure in the industry is set up, especially around compliance and regulation, that companies want to find human failure because otherwise they might be exposed financially from a regulatory failure. And I get worried that this is the continuous, especially as cyber insurance becomes more popular and companies start looking at it. I'm hoping the cyber insurance policy doesn't force us down that path, that what I did see in the maritime industry. So that's a fear that I have, that we start looking for human failure because it pays.
Yeah. Yeah. The unintended consequences. I always, it's always at the root of why things end up best intentions. And then I'm sure the insurance had all the best intentions, but the unintended consequences. Now we just blame people rather than actually trying to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And one thing, so Jessica, one thing as well is that I've seen a lot in the industry as well, and this is something, getting your perspective on it, is that my view is that, we're all here to defend. My goal is, I use my expertise to what I realized a few years ago when I did a pen test, that my job is not security. I quickly realized that actually my job is to identify business risk, either human side or technology side or process side, and use my knowledge in order to help actually reduce that risk. And my experiences in the security side of things of how to reduce that risk. Now, with that, one of the things is that, we tend to have, all companies will have incidents. There's no 100% security. The incidents can be big or small. But what I hate is seeing this aggressive finger pointing organizations when they do become victims. Ultimately, I do see is that, organizations, they all are also the victim here. They're also, they're the victim, their employees are victims, their customers are victims. So from your perspective, do you see, in the industry, how do we deal with that? How do we improve to make sure that vendors aren't just using these as an opportunity to sell products, and that we realize that we're here we're a collective, we're a community, all with the same goal in mind? How do we overcome that?
Yeah, it's really challenging because I think we see it, and you see it on social media, don't you? Whenever there's an incident that becomes kind of public knowledge, and it's really unhelpful because, of course, it then just it's stressful. I think for the organization that's a victim, there are our peers working in those organizations, and they're being attacked by their peers in the community. And of course, again, it's on this sort of higher level, just drives people to try and hide incidents because reputational damage can be one of the most damaging things. And so people don't want to talk about it because they don't want the finger to be pointed at them. I do again think the tide is sort of turning, and it's becoming less acceptable in the community to take that kind of approach. I think some people still struggle with it. I remember giving a presentation at a conference, I don't know, maybe 6 or so years ago now. And I was talking about this. I was talking about this kind of victim blaming of individuals and organizations. And it's the one time I've had someone literally heckle me in the middle of my talk and derail it. And it was my fault. I was a pretty new speaker and I allowed it to happen. And we kind of got into this debate of like, to what extent do you blame an organizational victim of an incident? And the person's perspective was they haven't done what they should to protect data. And that might be my data. It might be personal data of people I care about, financial data. They should be doing more. And if they get attacked, then it's their fault. And I was kind of saying, well, that might be the case in some instances. There is often organizations, things that they can do more of. But it's difficult. It's challenging. There's no such thing as 100% security. People are out there working hard at it. And if we're looking at a hierarchy of blame, the criminals have got to be at the top of this, right? Yet we often don't talk about them because they're often unseen. And as humans, we like to attribute blame. And, you know, that sells from a news perspective when you can have a bad guy, person, you know, organization, and when you can pitch kind of good against bad. And if you can't identify the attackers, then sometimes the victim gets into that role of being blamed.
Is part of the cause here is that when we can't point the blame to any, you know, company, and we've also, you know, got to the point where we're blaming countries without having really good attribution, and that doesn't also, you know, provide any value other than actually create more political strains.
Yeah.
Right. You know, I was going to say, is sort of bringing into the physical. So a number of years ago, a friend of mine was walking in DC, got stabbed and robbed. He was on a street in DC. To say, like, what could he have done differently is just not an option. Like, yeah, he could have not been there, but he needed to be there. He was going to his car from, you know. So I think that there's that same sort of, you know, you have to bring it back to that person who's like, well, obviously the company's not doing everything they could. Yeah, I guess my friend could have been wearing a Kevlar vest and could have, you know, there's any number of things, but there's like this risk.
Car.
Right, exactly. Like there's only so much that you can really do to defend yourself against certain things. And it's sometimes it's just bad luck. Sometimes it's wrong place, wrong time. Sometimes it's, you don't realize that you're a target for whatever reason. And
we had to call them. We had to be honest. One thing is that, you know, even Jessica, I don't know if you have recommendations in like the PR and communication side, because that also is a problem in our industry, is that when we have people coming out and making these, you know, the cyber attack was sophisticated hackers, you know, in my mind they're digital thieves. They're just, we need to, by calling it sophisticated and calling them hackers, we're putting them in a pedestal that we should not be doing. We're putting them up there, and they actually enjoy that. We had to get down to really calling them. It's crime. It's digital thieves. We have to get calling them to what it really is, and those, you know, companies and employees are victims, and we have to make sure that, you know, this is no different from going in and robbing a bank, or going to your point, Mike, you know, going and stabbing someone in the street. Is that there is a human impact here? There is a financial impact, and that we have to make sure we call it what it is. They're not leaking data; they're stealing data. We had to get to really getting into, and our terminology is horrible. We like acronyms. We like, you know, they create new marketing ideas. But I think we really have to get back to the basics and really start getting into consistently calling these crimes and really highlighting the impact.
I completely agree. I think it's, you know, they're criminals. That's what they are, and that's what we should be calling them. And that brings a clarity as well. And I think on the victim blaming thing, it's part of it, just to kind of go back to that for a second, part of it is down to a psychology thing. And it's the same with physical attacks. And when we see victim blaming there, as with cyber attacks, is if I can blame a victim, it makes me, even subconsciously, feel more comfortable that it won't happen to me. And that's what it comes down to. Often when we see victim blaming is people say, oh, well, they did that wrong. I would never do that. So I'm fine. I don't need to worry about this.
Is it that they feel more comfortable, or they just feel superior?
Yeah, maybe a bit of both, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, it's pointing the finger and just making
Right.
yourself feel better.
Right. When I walk around, my eyes are always up. I'm looking from side to side. That would never happen to me.
You got your little masculine walking in the defense.
Absolutely. Right.
On, so.
Right.
I'm Tom Cruise. I'm Tom Cruise in disguise. I'm fine.
Exactly.
So, but I do find, one thing I find is that actually organizations should help the victim as well, and actually become I find that the best people to speak out are those who are victims, because they really know the true impact. And I do find that even turning them into spokespeople or sharing their story within the organization, it reminds me, going back, I think one thing that changed a whole perception in the industry, I think, was when Norsk Hydra were the victim of, and they created videos. They showed the real people. They showed people working around the clock, spending time away from their families, ordering pizza and trying to recover the systems. And I think they really I think that was one for me, I think, that all companies could probably take a good lesson from, into really showing, when we do become victims, and organizations will, that we have to really start highlighting, their true impact, what it means for people. Ultimately, because I think, criminals are criminals. The ethics are out there. They're not going to have any ethical kind of standards. And I think we have to get to the point even getting where countries cannot provide safe havens for them. We have to hold the countries where they're providing safe havens for those criminals to operate. Really has to mean, we have to work as a collaborative, community together.
I completely agree.
Yeah, I'm curious what you think, Jessica, but I would say that by doing that, I think it would also help. So right now, all of the publicity is around the hackers, and like you look at TV shows, whether it's like Mr. Robot or whatever it is, that sort of, makes it seem like this like Robin Hood, type of person. And if we were to do more to show the response, yes, that what we should be doing is highlighting those people. They're the heroes in the story. They're the ones who we want to emulate. And I wonder if it would also help tip the scales, not just from showing the real cost of this, but also tip the scales towards, isn't this the type of person you want to be? The person who at 3 a.m. gets that call and like saves the day, as opposed to the person, being just hacking into some system and stealing some money and getting away with it. So I wonder, it's probably double.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I've seen that approach work internally in organizations as well, from an awareness raising point of view, from a cultural point of view, of humanizing the InfoSec team, of really kind of, people like to have heroes. And when you showcase actually the work of the InfoSec team, what they do in terms of incident response, and show that they are people, then that can really help. If you've got an organization where the rest of the business feels a bit far from InfoSec and they're not really engaging, that can really help with that. And actually speaking to a client the other day, and I asked them, what's the most successful thing you feel your team has done over the last year or so for awareness raising? And they actually spoke about an incident, and the person, it was someone that had clicked on a link in a phishing email, and then that person agreed to be a case study in a really positive way. Exactly what you're talking about was sort of showcased in a newsletter, and because they'd reported it, they obviously used that angle and talked about how this person did exactly the right thing in reporting it. They talked about the follow-up, what it meant for the InfoSec team, and it had a massive impact, and people are still kind of talking about that now. So we can use those stories internally as well as externally.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I was at a company a number of years ago where they hired somebody to do various attacks, whether it was USB drop attacks and all these different things. And I remember, and I still remember the story. There was one woman who, I guess they had the company had set up a fake website and was like, oh yeah, we're beta testing our new HR system. Please go ahead and log in with your Windows credentials. And she just was sort of half like paying attention, started logging in, hit the login button, realized right away, like, oh crap, what did I do? Called security, and they're like, hey, not a big deal. This happened to be a simulated attack. And she and the security team like made a big deal about how she responded and how well it went and the rest of it, that I still remember that story from now coming up on probably 10 years. And to the point where I remembered that being such a positive experience that I've done sort of similar things at Cybrary where, sort of highlighting, like I have security footage of somebody tailgating into our office and one of the employees sort of noticing, stepping up and being like, who are you here to visit? And it's not his, he just happened to be going from one part of the office to another part of the office, saw this person come in, stepped up, did the right thing. And I was like, that's what we need to make sure that we're highlighting, that people do that. And I think those messages stick with people way more than don't do this, always make sure nobody's following from behind, that type of stuff.
Yeah, we need to show that success in these scenarios is when people really kind of are making a difference. And I'm not meaning that the company has become a victim of attacks and the employees have become victims, but those successes, I think that the Norsk Hydro one really that was made a really impressive, positive image to me. So Jessica, one thing I'd like to also ask, I think it's really important, and some of the work that UNFC is doing is amazing, especially with the next generation of the kids that's coming through. And I'd like to talk about that, is that I've done a lot of work with educating myself, and Mike continue to talk about how do we make kids safe online. And some of the kind of the work that you're doing is amazing in educating the future kids and really getting them involved. Can you talk a little bit about some of those activities that you're doing?
Sure, yeah, happy to. It's something we're really passionate about at Cygenta, and actually the whole team gets involved. They don't have to, we don't force it on them, but I guess it's part of the ethos of people that we work with. So everyone is really committed to that, and it's something we find really rewarding personally as well. So we do all sorts. So at Cygenta, we're a partner of the NCSC Cyber First Schools scheme. We've been supporting that for years. And through that, run loads of activities. We obviously moved it online this year. So we ran a YouTube series where we answered questions and talked about different parts of cybersecurity, all aimed at school pupils and students. We just ran a cybersecurity writing competition. So with the schools in the local area, we said, do you want to write an essay and say what cybersecurity means to you, like 300 or so words, and the winners will get a copy of my book and some stuff like that. And we were inundated. We've had over 900 entries in like the space of 2 weeks.
That's
so
awesome.
We have an amazing team of industry judges who are judging the entries as we speak. Madeline on my team has done an amazing job of kind of whittling down entries as well. So we do all sorts of stuff. We do some stuff with Teen Tech, which is a fantastic organization in the UK that focuses on tech in general, but has quite a strong cybersecurity sort of stream to it. So we did a live event, a virtual event for over 800 school kids in the northeast of England, which is where I'm from, a couple of weeks ago, which was great fun. Yeah, we do all sorts of stuff and we love it, and love seeing that impact and seeing kids really start to get what this subject is so that they're more secure and so that they think about it as a profession as well. And so seeing some of them kind of decide they want to go into being an apprentice or they're maybe going to study at university is incredibly rewarding, and they're so bright that you just think, okay, we're going to be all right. Actually, the kids have got it.
That's great. I mean, for me, I think it's amazing, and we really do need to make sure that we engage with the next generation of future defenders and protectors in the world, and what you're doing is amazing. Your book, how do people get the book? Can you tell a little bit about what to do? Sure. Because I think it's amazing. I know how difficult it is to write. So tell us about it and how the audience can get a copy.
Sure. Yeah. This time last year, I was frantically trying to finish it, and I'm really pleased with it. Actually, I have written this book essentially for me 10 years ago. Someone coming into the industry or thinking about the industry, just getting started and wanting to get an overall picture. There's so many resources and great books out there, but something that kind of brings together the human, the technical, the physical, that talks about social engineering, technical vulnerabilities, cyber war, what cybersecurity means to different industries, everyone from pop stars to footballers to big banks and small businesses, and what individuals can do, organizations can do, and profiles of the people in the industry. I really wanted to tell the stories of people working in different roles. So it's something we find with the outreach is, and I remember this at school, trying to understand what people actually do in a job can be really tough until you're in the world of work.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I've had great feedback from people in the industry, executives. There's a chapter on cybersecurity for board members, and from those students and people just starting out. So it's Confident Cybersecurity, available from all good booksellers. And if anyone reads it, let me know what you think.
Yeah, we'll make sure that whatever link, I don't know where we're going to put it, but we'll put it in the show notes that we have. We'll make sure that people get a copy to the link in whichever, we'll make sure from regional wise they'll get access to it. So absolutely. Yeah. And Jessica, it's been awesome having you on. This is fantastic. And I think this is really important. I think it's really humanizing security. That's what we need to do, is we need to show that technology is here to help us do our job, not to replace us. And that's ultimately, we needed to work with us together. We definitely need more people like you, more people coming in the industry, more people that have a perspective on not just, I'm one of the old retro guys here, and Mike as well. We're old school, and we have a very binary kind of process thought, but we definitely need more perspective, more about the human behavior, more about how we can make security work for people. How do we make it easier? So it's a pleasure. Any final thoughts, any things that you would like the audience to know that you'd like to change the world?
To change the world, to change the world in one sentence. If anyone wants to...
No pressure.
Well, I prepared this earlier. No, it's been a real pleasure. Really enjoyed speaking to you all. What I would say is, cybersecurity is very broad, and I focus on the human side. Luckily, there are people really heavily focusing on the technical side, people focusing on the physical side. The more we can all work together and recognize how broad a discipline it is, then I think the more successful we will all be.
Yeah, absolutely. This episode, was it really pleasure. And as again, for the audience, every 2 weeks, 401 Access Denied, join us for these fun conversations. Again, provide us your feedback and comments. And it's been a pleasure as always, Jessica. And again, make sure stay safe, and look forward to speaking to you all again soon. Thank you.